and seabirds while improving the quality of life for coastal residents. His work with Audubon, South Carolina involves both stewardship and resilience and anything coastal bird related. He has a master's degree in environmental and sustainability studies from the College of Charleston and a BS in biology and environmental studies from Cornell College in Iowa. He is also a photographer and kayak guide in his free time. So without any further delay, I'll just turn this over to Nolan.
Thanks so much, Betty. And it's so great to be here to present to y'all today. You guys have such an amazing shorebird stewardship program on Kiowa. And it's been a pleasure working with Betty and with Aaron Given and all of our friends all over the coast on the stewardship program. And y'all are a great example of a site that really works. I think because of all the great volunteers and all the great leadership like Betty. So I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation here. Let me do that one more time so I can make sure I get the settings right. Third time's the charm. Okay, so I am focusing today on what I think is the sassiest seabird in South Carolina, the least tern. They're the smallest, they're the spunkiest. They have a lot of cool behaviors that you can see out on the beach right now. This time of year is when these birds are courting, they're starting to lay eggs and establish colonies where they can. And so they're a really exciting bird for me to talk about. I often get asked the question, what is your favorite bird? And that's a difficult one to answer because it kind of changes every day. But one pattern in my answer actually has been that least tern are my favorite bird on more days than not, because whenever I get to see them out on the beach, it's kind of a treat just because they have such flashy displays and they're just really fun to watch. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to try to cover a couple different things and would love to answer questions anytime throughout. So if you think of questions, like was said earlier, please put them in the chat and I'll be watching the chat to answer those questions. But if you want to hold them till the end, I can answer them then too. So I want to give a background of Audubon, South Carolina, the organization that I work for, and then a background about shorebird stewards. And then we'll go into talking specifically about least tern, how to identify them, some of their cool behaviors, and then what are the conservation challenges that they face. And then we'll end it on, I always try and end these presentations on a positive note because there are a lot of challenges that these birds have to face every single year, but there are things that you can do and may already be doing as a steward. So we'll start here with just a really quick background of Audubon, South Carolina. So we are an international nonprofit organization, but we do have a state office here in South Carolina with a staff of about anywhere between 11 to 16 staff members, depending on the season. And throughout the international network, we are organized in flyways. And so here in South Carolina, we're a part of the Atlantic Flyway. And if you're unfamiliar with flyways, these are, that's a word to describe the main routes that birds take when they migrate. And so on the Atlantic Flyway, specifically on the coasts, we have a lot of shorebirds that will migrate from South and Central America up through and follow our East Coast and go up to the Arctic to nest. And then some stay here with us in South Carolina to nest. So this graphic, of course, just highlights the flyways of the Americas on our hemisphere. And focusing on these flyways helps us better organize how we prioritize our work and the species that use our local environments. And so in addition to coastal work, we do a lot of other things as well. including the 4 other strategic priorities that you see on the screen. So our working lands and healthy forests, that's a really robust program here in South Carolina that we run. Bird-friendly communities, and then climate work, as well as water. All of these, throughout all of these strategic priorities, we work with people, we work at specific places, and we help implement and craft policies that will benefit birds and the places that they need. And if you want to know more about any of this other work, you can feel free to ask me questions, or you can visit our website online. For coasts, though, our work, we aim to protect the most important breeding, stopover, and wintering sites for birds in the Atlantic flyway. And in South Carolina, that means that our work is kind of divided up into stewardship and then resiliency. So stewardship focuses on reducing the impacts, negative impacts of human disturbance, and cultivating a conservation ethic among young people and old people and everybody in between. And our resiliency work really focuses on creating and maintaining quality habitat for birds. And moving on into what stewardship means, and I want to show you a couple slides about kind of the history of stewardship in the US and then specifically in South Carolina. Because for those of you that are already stewards on Kiowa Island or on Seabrook Island, or wherever on the coast you may be, you guys are a really strong piece of a really vast network of sites that do very similar work to what you do. And this is actually connected all the way back to the early 1900s, to when the first Audubon game wardens were hired after the first bird sanctuary islands were established in Florida and North Carolina. And one of those Audubon game wardens that gets a lot of attention in the textbooks is this gentleman named Guy Bradley. He was a steward, or a game warden was his title, down in Florida. And he only lived to be about 35 years old, because his job was to literally stand in between poachers who were trying to get to birds like great egret and snowy egret, to gather the bodies of these birds for their feathers to put on hats. That's called the millinery trade. And so eventually the millinery trade was deemed illegal, and but people would still go out to nesting sanctuary islands where wading birds were nesting and poach them. And so Guy Bradley's job, and other stewards and game wardens like him, their job was to stand between those poachers and the birds that were nesting on the islands throughout the state. And he gets a lot of attention, Guy Bradley does, because he was actually killed in the line of duty. He was shot and killed after confronting a man and his 2 sons who were hunting egrets in the Everglades. So his much publicized death at the age of 35 galvanized conservationists and served as inspiration for future legislation to protect bird populations. And so the work that we do, although it is by far not as dangerous as it was in the early 1900s, our work is very similar to this. You know, we as stewards are one of the front lines of defense between potential disturbances and the birds that need to nest and reproduce on our beaches. So I'm going to fast forward and focus in on South Carolina a little bit. But in 2015, we were able to kind of rejuvenate the stewardship programs in South Carolina. I arrived in the state in 2014, and we were able to get a couple pilot sites established in South Carolina. So those were Dewey's Island, Folly Beach Lighthouse Inlet, and then Harbor Island down in Beaufort. And now a short while later, this year in 2022, Kiowa's been active for many, many years now, and there are now, depending on the year, 11 to 14 established South Carolina stewardship sites. There's hundreds of volunteers that are trained every year as a part of different stewardship programs, and almost 3,000 volunteer hours are spent. And this is a growing program. You guys are part of a vast network that does a lot of good. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But zooming in now some more into South Carolina, the map to the left is just a picture of the Atlantic Flyway. And I want to just show how important South Carolina is in this ladder of states that go up the Atlantic Flyway. So we're a pretty important piece of the puzzle, a piece of the pie. We have 187 miles of coastline, almost 3,000 tidal shorelines, and about 35 barrier islands in the state. These places are the places where birds rely on, where they need to rest and forage and nest on throughout their journey, whether they're migratory birds and they're just stopping over here for the spring or the fall, or maybe they're nesting here and need safe, suitable beaches to nest. The picture to the right, this is just to give you an idea about all the other stewardship sites throughout the state that you guys are an important part of the network. There are, as far north as Huntington Beach State Park and as far south as Hunting and Harbor Islands, and then actually down at a little island called Little Capers Island. There are stewards that go out there as well. And sorry, I forgot this was the next slide. So currently we have 11 stewardship sites. 2 of these sites, Seabrook and Kiowa, you guys are very autonomous, meaning that you run your own programs, and we support however we can. But all of these sites have suitable nesting shorebird habitat and are great spots for stopping points for migratory shorebirds as well. But why do we need stewards? And a lot of you probably already know this, but coastal birds are declining. Over the past 40 to 50 years now, we've seen a 70% decline in North American shorebirds. Migratory shorebirds are at risk now more than ever. Wintering shorebirds also need protection. That's a picture of a piping plover to the left, and which are actually here for about 9 months out of the year, and are just trying to feed and rest and survive until the next nesting season. And then, of course, our nesting sites are also limited. And this is our a picture of a least tern colony, though you may notice that, well, so I'll say that least tern colonies normally would be nesting on a beach front, an open sandy beach with not much vegetation, flat but dry. But does this look like a beach? Not so much. This is actually a gravel rooftop. And I'll come back to this a little bit later, but our beach sites, our suitable nesting beach sites for least tern are so limited now that the majority of least tern colonies actually exist on rooftops in South Carolina. This comes with its own set of new threats and conservation challenges, though it is a really interesting adaptation that these birds have taken to nesting on gravel rooftops. I guess it looks beachy enough for them to survive. But a couple of things that make this kind of a dangerous spot for them to nest, although it does work in some cases. After chicks hatch, they are able to run around as much as, or however they want to. You know, they're very different from bluebirds or cardinals or Carolina wrens that might nest in our backyards. But whereas the bluebird chick has to sit in the nest for a month and have mom and dad feed it, least tern chicks are up and running within just a couple of hours on their own. So if there's no guard on the gutter, chicks can very easily fall into the gutter or fall off the edge of the roof. These gravel rooftops also have a layer of like a black tar usually underneath it. So if the gravel is pushed off, I've seen some pretty gruesome pictures from SC DNR surveys of least tern baby chicks getting stuck in that black tar and then dying from overexposure to the sun. It's not easy nest on rooftops. And so as many beach habitats that we can encourage, just, that's the preferred habitat. But onto kind of the fun stuff, I promise. Our least tern identification, they're actually a pretty easy bird to identify as far as beach birds go. And so I'll actually also say we are able, we're really lucky to use a lot of pictures from the Audubon Photography Awards contest. And so a lot of these pictures are from that contest. Some beautiful shots here of a parent watching over its chick. And often when they do this, they are trying to shade the chick, keep them cool from the sun. But what a unique photo, right? Just sitting right there in the shell. Really cute. So how do we identify least tern? Well, terns in general, I always describe as a more streamlined gull. Everybody's familiar with seagulls. Our most common one in the summer here in South Carolina are the laughing gull. So terns, in comparison, are just more streamlined. They're like the F1 race car of the tern of the seabird world compared to gulls. They usually have longer, pointier bills. Their wings are more pointed, and their whole body is just more streamlined. And this is so that they can dive for fish and be better adapted to being more of a specialist that feeds almost 100% on fish. Whereas gulls, they'll eat a hot dog or some Cheetos or something if they can get to it. Least tern are also the smallest seabird in South Carolina. They're our smallest tern. Really, they're about the size of compare it to even like a bluebird or a cardinal. They're very small. They have a distinct yellow bill, as you can see in this awesome photo, a white forehead, and I'll point that out in the next photo as well. And then something that isn't as good of a marker, but it is unique about these birds. They have two black primary feathers, and primary feathers are those the feathers that on the back part of the wing that we call primary flight feathers. So you can see in this picture, I think you can see my mouse, 1, 2 black feathers. They're very dark, so they kind of are at the tips of least tern's wings. Least tern also have Napoleon syndrome, where they're so tiny, but they're so spunky. They have all these really kooky behaviors where they're one of the only seabirds or coastal birds in South Carolina that will actually dive bomb predators. They'll get in your face if they see you as a predator, even though they're so small. They're boastful, even though they're small. And so I jest with Napoleon syndrome, but it does kind of seem like that's what they have. In the winter and for juveniles, they look very similar. The black is not on their head is not as striking or clear cut between the black and the white. But the other big difference in the winter and in juvenile birds is that their bill is not completely yellow like this. It looks more black. So some cool behaviors and something that you'll see all throughout the season are least tern diving for fish. All terns do this, but least tern tend to dive really close to shore. They're looking for small fish that they can carry off with them, little millet or silverfish, mullet. Yeah, silverfish. And what you'll see them do is kind of hover in place as they scan the water for fish. And then they'll kind of float down a little bit and hover there for a second, and then eventually splash. They'll dive bomb into the water and try and get some fish. If you look up in the sky every now and then, you'll probably see least tern doing this, especially near nesting sites. But my third bullet point here is that you'll probably, this is true for a lot of birds, you'll probably hear them before you see them. Sibley's Guide to Birds describes their call as a sharp, high-pitched kadik kadik or kadik. And I'm actually going to play it off of my phone here for you guys. Hopefully you can hear it. I'll play a couple different calls. We'll go two more. So that's more of a typical shrill call that you might hear them make as they're flying by or near a nest, near their nesting site, which most often they will be here in the summer. And that is more of a like a chit alarm call. And then this is them calling at a nest. So that really high pitched, it's well, I would say an easier call to learn on the coast. So if you hear that sharp, high pitched padik, then look up, look around because you could be about to witness some cool diving for fish behavior. Or maybe you're close to a nesting colony and you need to take a couple steps back. Some other fun behaviors, and I mentioned this already, but these guys will buzz your head if you get too close to their nesting site. One of my first seasons here, I was able to work with DNR to survey a few least tern nesting sites on the beach, and it was kind of funny. They advised you to wear a hat when you did these because they would only do this once a season, and these folks are trained to do this so that they don't disturb the birds, or at least they keep it to a minimum. But it's important to get a count of how many nests there are at each site, and SCDNR folks do that. But they advise that I wear a hat because the first thing that they do is they'll send out a scout to check you out, but then right after that they'll start buzzing your head, and they won't hit you, but they'll get pretty close. It can be kind of scary if you're not familiar with it. But then lastly, and I've seen this happen a couple of times, the reason for the hat was that they'll bomb you. So they've been known to poop on predators too, to try and get them to go away. So I say they're so sassy and they're so spunky. Some other really fun behaviors that I want to point out are after they dive for that fish, they're bringing that fish to somebody on the beach. It could be that they're just eating it for themselves, but it could be that they're a hopeful pre-mating individual that is bringing it to a female on the beach. And in that case, if the female accepts it, then they'll copulate for that season. You might see some R-rated behavior like on the left picture here. They could also be later in the season taking that fish to a chick and handing it off to them. They will feed their young for until they're able to fledge and find food on their own. And I want to spend some time on that courtship behavior because it is really cool and unique. And so these photos, I believe, were taken on Seabrook Island by Ed Conrad a couple of years ago. Captured this really well. And so the male will, in the beginning of the season, go off and find the shiniest little silverfish he can find. He'll bring it to a female and try and impress her with the fish. This behavior of gift giving is pretty common in the bird world as far as courtship goes, or I should say it's not uncommon. But the male will wag this fish in front of the female, and it's either something about the fish or something about the quality of the male's feathers. And the female will get to decide, yes, I want to mate with you, or no, I'm not interested. And in this case, looks like she was not interested. So if that happens, the male will sometimes eat the fish and go catch a new one, or I've seen them try with a different female and the same fish before, which is kind of goofy. But, sometimes they're successful. So this male brought another fish to the female takes it. And I'd say that's a pretty proud looking male least tern on that last photo with that beak up in the air. So the female will accept the fish, and then they'll end up having chicks that season. And actually I have a video of that behavior where the male wags the fish in front of them. that I will show now. It should play with sound. I apologize if it's loud. But it's cool to see it live action. The male literally just wags this fish, and the female, it always looks like to me that the females are just kind of like, what's going, you know, they're kind of playing hard to get a little bit, looking in the other direction, or kind of pretending to ignore the male and his fish. But it's cool to, I think it's cool to see that video. That was by Sean Grazer. And so after, you know, this is really what we want to see after they go through that whole courtship behavior, and they lay their eggs, and after a little less than a month, the eggs will hopefully hatch if all goes well, and then they get to take care of their chicks for another about a month before the chicks will fledge on their own. And so incubation for coastal birds is a little bit, it's a little bit different from how we normally think about, you know, mama birds sitting on the eggs to keep them warm. It's actually the opposite for shorebirds and seabirds. Their incubation is meant to keep the eggs cool and shaded. And we actually know from research that if eggs get too cold, they will slow down their development. But if they get too warm, they can perish. And so that's the goal of these least tern all summer long. They're trying to incubate, keep those eggs shaded and cool. And the nests themselves, you can see here, it's not much of a nest at all, but it's just a little shallow scrape in the sand. The eggs are speckled to kind of blend in with the sand, as are the feathers of the chick. So I have some more photos taken from South Carolina beach sites in the last couple of years. This is just some more stuff of what you will probably see on the beach at Kiowa, as well as Seabrook and other nesting sites up and down the coast. But the top left and the top center photos, those are, well, the top left is courtship. And then you have some chicks with one of the parents bringing back food in that top photo. This top right one is that's a young juvenile bird. It's either has recently fledged or is close to fledging. And for those who don't know, fledging just means that they shed their baby feathers and they get their adult feathers and are able to fly. Here in this photo, I love this. It's a three least tern going after a ghost crab that was probably in their nesting territory, getting a little too close to some nests. Here's a chick in this small photo, a couple more chicks here, some more R-rated behavior, some more chick photos, least tern bathing in water, and of course the closed off area. And this photographer got a little too close and had the least tern dive bombing him. Of course, he knows now that you should avoid ever having the chance to take this picture, but it was an accident in his case. So they're super cute. They're really spunky. They have all these awesome behaviors. However, there are a number of things that they have to deal with throughout the season, and it is really tough being a bird. But I was curious about what the populations look like in South Carolina. And so I work a lot with our friends over at South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and Mary Catherine Martin in particular does all of the least tern work in the state. And so if you have a question about least tern, or if I ever have questions about least tern, it's Mary Catherine who I'm asking. She monitors every single rooftop nesting colony as well as the beach colonies all throughout the state. She is amazing. And so this data is from the work that she's done to, and some of y'all have done on Kiowa to gather this data. So in South Carolina, this is generally, there are usually anywhere between 500 and 1,500 nesting pairs in the state every year. A lot of those colonies actually will be depredated by a predator, a raccoon, or a coyote, or a mink, or an avian predator, or will be washed over because of high tides, and that's getting more and more common every year. But every year there are a few colonies that we hope are successful. And actually, really cool news that Betty and I found out yesterday from SCDNR is that Kiowa Island actually had the largest successful colonies in the state in both 2020 and 21. So y'all should be really, really proud of this. I think your colony last year was like 145 nests. And to have such a large colony be successful is a huge accomplishment. So you guys are doing amazing work on Kiowa. Like I said earlier, the majority of least tern nest on pebble rooftops throughout the state, which is just kind of interesting. It kind of shows that there are very few actual beach sites available still. And then the unfortunate truth about these birds is, you know, if there's human disturbance, if there are predators that get too close, it may not be like somebody directly stepping on eggs on accident. It is often more likely that eggs will cook in the few minutes that it takes for mom and dad to flee the nest and then come back. If that disturbance is around for too long, just a couple of minutes, the eggs can fry, unfortunately. It is really hard out there for coastal birds. And so in addition to human disturbance, which I'll elaborate on a little bit more later with some information that hopefully is new to some of you, the other largest threat to our coastal birds and least tern is lack of habitat. So this is a list, or just a graphic that actually Melissa Chaplin with the SC Fish and Wildlife Service created. The next couple of slides are actually borrowed from her. But there are a lot of things that they have to deal with. A lot of them have to do with lack of habitat. Climate change, sea level rise, pushes beaches, squeezes them in from the ocean as we get high tides, overwashing different sites. That squeezes the beaches landward, and then coastal development and recreation from people pushes these beaches seaward, squeezing that habitat smaller and smaller. And on this image of the coast, which you probably are recognizing, this is Kiowa, here's Seabrook, DeVoe Bank, Botany Island and Botany Bay Plantation, and Edisto down here. In these places, there really are just a couple little spots where birds nest, where is suitable for them to nest. And it's in these little slivers of habitat that we need to do our best to protect, because really it's a very small fraction of the coast. And the unfortunate truth is, as more and more gets built, a lot of people come to the beach to enjoy it. I love going to the beach for fun too, but unfortunately that means that the wildlife gets squeezed out. And so finding where that balance is really critical. And honestly, the fact that y'all have had successful least tern colonies the last couple of years is a testament to the hard work y'all have been doing to find that balance. So on top of coastal squeeze that we just talked about, the other biggest leading preventable threat to our coastal birds and to least tern is recreational disturbance. And so I want to show you some research that has been ongoing over the last 5 to 8 years now. It's called the Atlantic Flyway Disturbance Project, which was funded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation as part of the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiative. One segment of the project was to conduct an extensive literature review. And in that review, there were 632 citations referencing disturbance. And then another segment, the next step of that project was to collect preliminary data to document disturbance throughout the flyway. And so a couple key findings from that work are on the screen now. So these say results indicate that shorebirds were impacted by human recreational disturbance throughout their annual life cycles. And then across all species included in this assessment, human disturbance negatively affects shorebirds. So it's now very well established that recreational disturbance is a serious concern along the Atlantic Flyway, including South Carolina. And so another phase of this project is actually being conducted. I finished a survey this morning on Seabrook for it in 2022 to test the implementation of different communication strategies and conservation strategies at different beach sites. So hopefully next year we'll have some more results from that study to share. And like I said earlier, even if people don't crush eggs or young, when walking through a colony, simply flushing birds in the air where their eggs are exposed to the sun can cause abandonment of entire colonies. So whether it's people, whether it's boats, or I'll show some other disturbance types in a minute, they can cause nest failure. So the bottom photo was actually taken from some colleagues in Florida. The photo is by Patrick Leary. It's a mixed flock of shorebirds that was actually flushed by this airboat in coastal Florida. And pictures like this are extremely common all up and down the flyway. And over in the Pacific too, anywhere that shorebirds use the beach. And it's actually been a bit of a struggle to find photos of people doing the right thing. I think more often, we're quick to take a photo of the bad thing happening, but one of my goals this year is to start to collect more photos of people walking around the flock or people respecting, keeping their distance from the nesting area. So maybe y'all can help me with that. Dogs too, and I'll go over this really quick. You guys know that dogs can be really dangerous to coastal birds. I have a dog. I love my dog, and there are certain beaches where I will bring her, but if it's near a shorebird or seabird area, they can be really devastating. So the laser eyes are just in jest. I do love dogs, I promise. So I'll share one more kind of sadder story about least tern. I promise I'm going to end this on a positive note, but the fact is that disturbance and flooding and all those other threats we talked about are really, really tough and make it really tough for a least tern to be successful nesting every year. And so this is a picture taken in 2014 in Volusia County, Florida. There is a colony in this picture. The birds were flushed off of it. The colony is inside these posts. And I always ask people to guess how many you think are inside the colony. For the sake of time, I'll just tell you. There were 60 nests here, and this colony was disturbed by, it was 2 dogs that were, the owner either didn't know or maybe didn't know that the dogs were not allowed to be off leash in this area. And so he let them off the leash, and they ran through near where the seabirds were nesting. They all got up and flushed, and in just a minute or two, and actually the stewards out there, I remember the story being told, the stewards quickly ran up to the owner and was like, "You need to get your dogs back on a leash. Here's why, like, please do it quick." And so they got them back on the leash in a minute or two, but this colony went from 60 nests down to 6 nests just with that one encounter. Drones too can be a disturbance that we're seeing more and more, especially if the drone takes off nearby. It'll get all the least tern up. I've seen it firsthand last year. down at that Beaufort site. You know, people are usually really nice and they'll take the drone back down because they just didn't know. But if it goes unchecked, then this example in California of an elegant tern colony could happen where the drone went up and it actually crashed into the elegant tern colony. This is in Bolsa Chica Ecological Preserve in California. And so very similar to how that one dog destroyed 60 nests, this one drone caused about 3,000 birds to abandon their approximately 15,000 nests. So really, really sad story here, but some other common disturbances include boats, kites, low-flying helicopters and airplanes, people walking through roped off areas, people setting up too close to nesting areas, and then driving on the beach too. This is all really the reason that you guys are out there, is to ensure that your least tern and other nesting birds can be successful throughout this season. And so I want to leave you on a positive note to say that you guys are doing amazing work, and many of those threats that I just went over, they can change. And that change really starts and continues with you. And so my task for you, and this will be easy for stewards because this is what you do, is to share this message with at least 2 other people. Bonus points if you go to the beach with this person and share it with them there. But conservation really begins with our awareness, and that awareness can lead to better behaviors on the beach. And with your help, we can see a lot more of this kind of thing happening. These cute little cotton ball on stick legs chicks being taken care of by mom and dad. It is a really cool thing to see, and y'all are really lucky to be able to see it on Kiowa. And if there is ever any doubt in your head that it doesn't work, I am here to assure you that stewardship does indeed work. There was a study published in the journal Conservation Biology in early 2021, that found that stewardship and management are both essential to helping coastal birds thrive. So this was a study led by Audubon science team. They looked at nearly 400 sites where Audubon stewarded birds on the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. And then the authors found that populations of 4 different species of vulnerable coastal birds grew 2 to 34 times faster at stewardship sites compared to birds that were in just protected areas without any stewardship. And one of those species that was included in the study is least tern. So those 4 species, including black skimmer, brown pelican, least tern, and piping plover, had all increased since 2007 at stewardship sites, but have decreased or increased more slowly at sites that were only protected or in unprotected areas. So stewardship works, and please give yourself a huge pat on the back if you're already part of the stewardship program. And if you're not, please become part of the flock. But either way, y'all being here and listening to this presentation is a really amazing thing. And I just want to thank you for being here and being part of the flock. So keep up the hard work, and thanks for listening. That's all the slides that I have. I'd love to take questions. And I don't know if y'all want to do questions in the chat, or I can pass it back off to Betty. And also,
I have a question.
Okay.
How long is it between the mating behavior and the time that the eggs get laid?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I'm not sure that I have an exact answer for you for least tern, but it often happens pretty quickly. If somebody else knows differently, please correct me. But I want to say that it can happen like the next day, like they'll copulate and then very quickly release an egg. That's a good question. Any others?
I was just wondering because I was out on the beach at Seabrook last week and there were quite a few least terns that were just having a swell old time. So I was just wondering, at what point we might see eggs.
Yeah, well, so a couple sites, I think actually including Kiowa and Seabrook, y'all have seen eggs already this season. But in a few instances, especially with the higher tides this week, we've seen a couple of our colonies getting washed over. So they had established nesting, or they had established nests, laid their eggs, and then the tide comes up overnight at like a really high tide. And because of the full moon, and it creates the right scenario to where the tide is just higher than usual, it will wash over the whole colony and wash those eggs away. After the eggs float or like are submerged in water for too long in salt water, they tend to not be viable anymore. But the hope is that, and this leads into your question, Leslie, I see in the chat, do they have more than one brood in a season? And the answer is yes. So if they fail with their first brood, that first clutch of eggs, they will try again. However, the later in the season it gets, the more difficult it is for them to produce eggs. And that's a very energy intensive thing for birds to do. And often they can only do like 2 or 3 clutches in a season. So Tony McDade asked in the chat, when does nesting season end? And closures usually end on October 15th. If least tern are successful, or if any of our nesting birds are successful the first time, then nesting season ends earlier than it does if they are disturbed a whole bunch. So it takes like about 25 days for eggs to hatch, and then 25 days for chicks to fledge. And so if all goes well, nesting season could be mostly over by the end of July, but in a lot of cases, it might not be till August or September or mid-October until nesting season is really over.
I have another question. Is there any data around whether a chick that's hatched in a certain place will come back there to nest, or is that random, or do they end up someplace different?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So that's called site fidelity. When a bird for whatever reason comes back to the same place to nest year after year. So I'm not sure about any research on least tern specifically where they have high site fidelity. However, there are more than a few instances of species like American oystercatcher that have been banded or tracked somehow coming back to the same site to nest. I am more familiar with bird species, females in particular, coming back to a site year after year if they were successful nesting the year before. I'm not so sure. I have not read anything, not to say it isn't out there, but I have not seen anything that says that chicks hatched at a site will come back to that same site. It's usually about if they nested there the year before, do they come back? So yeah, that's a question that I think is still sort of being answered with a lot of species. So shout out to Kiowa Island's banding program. I think they banned some shorebirds, but a lot of birds that use the maritime forest there on Kiowa, and that banding research that they do, that's led by Aaron Given on Kiowa. That research that they do banding those birds, every single bird that's banded and resighted or recaptured, that adds another sliver of information to piece together the picture of these birds' life history. So that kind of research is the stuff that helps us answer questions like what you just asked. See a question from Laura. When are the babies ready to leave? Where do they go? Yeah, so babies they're ready to leave as soon as they're able to fly. We see them disperse pretty quickly after they fledge. They might hang out for another week or two, but least tern are here usually just in the summer. And so then after chicks fledge and after nesting season is over, I want to say these birds they'll head south and go into like Mexico, Central America. Though the range map that I usually look at, and this is bad, but it only usually includes North America. That's something I might have to look up. Where do they go after nesting season? Well, and so I don't see any other questions yet, but just in general, after nesting is over and if they were successful, the next goal for a lot of our coastal birds is just to eat as much as possible. And so where do the babies go when they leave? It's to go find food. So they'll follow where the food is.
Is that it?
Yeah, I think the questions have slowed down. I don't see any more.
Okay, well, thank you, Nolan. That was so interesting. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you to everybody for being here. It's always so great to see so many people that want to learn about shorebirds. And this talk is going to be recorded, or has been recorded. So if anybody needs the recorded version that they either want to watch again or share with a friend, contact us and we can get that recorded version to you. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just the second of 4 talks that we will be hosting. Our next one is going to be on June 8th at 6:00 p.m. And the topic is going to be red knots. And it'll be an interesting perspective because rather than talk about the red knots during their season, it's sort of going to be after they leave. So we'll probably find out about what has just happened with the red knots. So hope you can join us. That'll be publicized in all the same ways that this talk was. I guess I just want to say the least terns are out on the east end of Kiowa, out past the ocean course. Grab your binoculars and go out there and check out that Napoleon complex behavior that Nolan tells us about, and check out these little cuties. So that's it for today. Thank you for everybody. Bye-bye.